All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Joaquin Esquivel, Chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. Today is Wednesday, August 6th. It is 9:01 a.m., and I would like to call this meeting to order. I'll begin by introducing my fellow board colleagues. Joining me this morning is Vice Chair Doreen Diadamo, Board Member Nicole Morgan, Board Member Laurel Firestone, and Board Member Sean McGuire. We're also joined by our Executive Director, Eric Oppenheimer, our two Chief Deputies, Karen Mogus and Eric Ekdahl, our Chief Counsel, Michael Laufer, our Clerk of the Board is Courtney Tyler, and assisting her today is Margie Argel and Biba Malatik. As you can tell, this is a hybrid meeting with both in-person and web components. If you're joining us virtually, you're viewing us through our traditional webcast on Cal EPA's website or the YouTube Live website. But if you intend on commenting on any of today's items, you need to be on the Zoom platform. There is a link at the top of the agenda with a form and instructions on how to get onto the Zoom platform. But if you're having any challenges, please do just email the clerk of the board at board.clerk@waterboards.ca.gov, and she can help get you on the platform. Once you are on the platform, your camera will be off. You will be on mute until it's your turn to speak on the item you've indicated. For everyone here in the room, good morning. Good to see you all. We're here in Sacramento in the California Environmental Protection Agency building. A few announcements for us as well. Please do observe the exits. If we happen to have an emergency, we'll calmly file out to Cesar Chavez Plaza and await further direction. Also, if you intend on commenting on any of today's items, there is a QR code at the side of the room and a laptop as well in order to sign up. Once you are at the podium, please do introduce yourself if you feel comfortable and any affiliation you are part of. And lastly, please do silence phones just so we have an uninterrupted discussion this morning. This is day 2 of our 2-day workshop, and so we'll get right into it. And today we have a pair of informational items. At the top, I want to note I'm going to be switching the order of today's items. We will be hearing item number 7 before we hear item number 6, both regarding PFAS work here within the state. And with that, I would like to hand things over to folks here from the Division of Drinking Water, Mr. Polhamus and crew. Good to see you. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Chair Esquivel. Happy to be here and talk about alphabet soup PFAS. We'll try to keep it simple, but it's unfortunately not going to be. I'm going to have Dan Newton, who's Assistant Deputy Director for our Northern Field Branch in DDW, and Wendy Link from Division of Water Quality, who we've been teaming up with to do the disadvantaged community testing, present a midpoint of the data they've got. So more work to come, but we thought it was important to show the board the progress so far. So take it away, Mr. Newton.
Thank you, Darren. Yes, good morning, members of the board, executive team. I'm Dan Newton, and I just wanted to say real quick, PFAS is a 4-letter acronym, but it is a class of chemicals that is over 10,000 strong. So something to kind of keep in mind as we're moving forward with this informational item. It's a large beast that we're talking about today. I think you'll find today's informational item quite engaging. We're sharing some of the highlights that, as Darren mentioned, we're halfway through testing and sampling at disadvantaged communities. And with that, we'll jump in. I'm going to provide a little background. So next slide, please. Part of the presentation today, we'll give a quick background, the different orders that we have. We'll talk about Assembly Bill 178, which is the backbone of the order and the authority and the funding that we have to perform this project. The PFAS broad spectrum testing, we'll talk about the various test methods and how we landed on those. The sampling progress, and then what we plan on doing once we complete this sampling effort and how we'll continue with the objectives of Assembly Bill 178. Next slide. So before we start diving into some of the details, I want to share the team here, the consortium. It's quite a broad reach of folks that engaged to design this project. First and foremost was US EPA. Their help through a ROAR grant. We spent 2 years designing this project with them. We also spent 2 years learning how to perform analysis on NTA, our non-targeted analysis process. We transferred that information. Well, I should say that our contract lab, Babcock Lab, was also part of that. So that the State Water Board, DDW and DWQ and our contract lab learned a lot from Office of Research and Development. Together with them, we're able to do things that we could not do alone, either of us could do alone. The next
on that note, I just want to emphasize, Dan, just the Office of Research and development is just such a critical partner with us on the federal level. And I know that it's been targeted for additional cuts. And I think it's just, I really want to emphasize how critical the resources and the expertise at ORD have been to this project and are to us as a state. And just want to make sure I emphasize that in this moment of, I know, concern around whether EPA will continue those sort of activities.
Thank you for that. Absolutely, we would not be here without them at this point. And internally, within the State Water Board, the Division of Water Quality and DDW treated this project holistically, just as groundwater. So Wendy and I have been working hip to hip for the past 7 years on this project. We tap resources in each division as needed. Wendy is our only dedicated resource for this project. And what we've completed by accessing other resources within the division has been tremendous. Quite a pool of talent that we're able to work with here at the Water Board, including OEMA. They've been a great partner. They've done the QCQA assurance, or Andrew Hamilton's our quality assurance, quality control officer, as is Chad Faring, who helped us with the grant management. The 3 boxes to the right are all through grant funding. So it took a lot of effort to round up and administer the grant. So once we designed the project and moved forward, we were able to, through a DFA grant, work with Sac State, the Office of Water Programs. Sac State basically is our contractor that executes the project. They issued an RFP, which you can see Geosyntec was a successful winner of the RFP, and our boots on the ground. And then we expanded our statewide lab contract with Babcock to perform all of the testing services that the sampling brought in. So quite an effort, a great team, in fact, an A team on this effort. I don't think I have anything else to add on that front. So a lot of people at play here. Next slide. So a little context before we dive into the data. DDW has a couple orders out right now for sampling PFAS. We have 2, in fact, bulleted here. The 2022 order, which is a culmination of several orders prior to that, but it's a current order that's out for sampling at locations adjacent to known PFAS sites, such as airports, refineries, chrome platers, landfills, and other positive detections. So this order is, the 2022 order is a quarterly monitoring order that requires systems to sample for PFAS. What we're talking about today are the results from the 2024 order, the next bullet. That is an order that was authorized via Assembly Bill 178 to sample at all disadvantaged communities that have a well. What's interesting about this is we're sampling at locations throughout the state, not where we think we're going to find PFAS, but at locations in all 4 corners: rural, urban, ag, industrial. It is a great cross-section of the state, especially based on the volume of wells that we're sampling, 3,600 wells. We have a tremendous data set. We're about 70% of the way through that sampling. So today we've got some interesting trends that we're going to share with you. So the presentation from this point on is focused on the 2024 order and the results of that order specifically. Next slide, please.
All right, good morning, everybody. So the objective of our broad spectrum testing methods and in regards to the DAC sampling project is really understanding that chemical space where PFAS is, right? You have those chemicals that you can identify using targeted methods. Those are kind of what we call that the part of the iceberg that's above the water. Drinking water utilizes EPA method, analytical method 533. That includes 25 analytes. We also included another set of PFAS. It's a much smaller set. It's what we call the ultra short PFAS. Those are very short chain PFAS. They are smaller molecules. They are being done by a different method, an ICMS-MS method. Those are becoming more known as we continue to study them. And one of the reflections this morning I had on this slide is that those are starting to emerge. And we will know much more about them and we will talk a lot more about them too during this presentation. The other part of what we are doing for this project, in order to understand that broad chemical space as much as we can that's available using commercial laboratories and availability there, is we're working with absorbable organic fluorine. It is an EPA method 1621. It is an ability to, at least as best as we can, that's available to understand more of a broader class. It's more like a proxy for total PFAS. And we're learning a lot today and through this project where AOF is its positives and where its limitations are. And by the time we come back to in the future, when we actually can finish this project, we'll be able to kind of understand more about where AOF really lands in that chemical space, and especially for drinking water, because drinking water has in this state have very low concentrations in comparison to other kind of source sites that have an immediate release. The other thing that is on this slide is non-target analysis, and this is where EPA ORD was a huge help for us in order to understand where non-target analysis can actually provide a benefit for this project. And non-target analysis is currently really done academically. It's usually can be done at state laboratories or by the EPA. But we were able to get that knowledge into our commercial laboratory to be able to perform that analysis using high-res mass spectrometry. It really provides us an idea. It provides an idea of what those chemicals can be in that water. It does not provide, at least in the way we had performed it, not concentrations, but it does identify what they are. And currently we have a spectra library based upon spectra can identify up to about 1,200 analytes currently.
And I think what Wendy and I are hoping is we can turn this iceberg upside down. That's kind of the plan as we move forward with our analysis and trying to develop test methods that will find a better snapshot of total PFAS. Next slide, please. I mentioned Assembly Bill 178 as the backbone of this effort. It provided 3 objectives that I've got highlighted here. Objective 1 was to identify and develop a broad spectrum method, which Wendy just covered as AOF. We selected that method through a 7-well sample set here in the state to identify which method would best pick up what the state's PFAS impact looks like, and we landed on AOF. That objective is complete, and we used that test method in Objective 2, which was to sample at disadvantaged community wells throughout the state. A piece of funding came with this Assembly Bill to perform that action, so the sampling at these disadvantaged communities, their wells, was a one-time sampling event free of charge, along with the monitoring and the testing, or I should say the sampling and the testing were free of charge. So Objective 2 is what we're here to talk about today. We're about 70% complete at this point. With 3,600 wells on the order, we've got quite a bit of data to share. The sampling, as Wendy mentioned, covers all of the sampling methods or test methods that we've discussed. And we hope to complete the sampling, early 26, with the remainder of 26 as full analysis of all the data. Objective 3, which we haven't started yet, Objectives 1 and 2 inform in Objective 3. We will use what we've learned and the test methods to contemplate a treatment technology approach or a class approach to regulating PFAS in drinking water. Next slide, please. Starting to dive into the results. This is a quick snapshot of where we are sampling in the state under the 2024 order for disadvantaged communities. The yellow circles are where we sampled to date. We're 70% complete, so that's 2,500 wells have been sampled so far. The rate of sampling is roughly 156 wells a month, 40 water systems. Impressive work by Geosyntec to have their teams out and blanket the state within a year. We still have a handful to go, and those are identified by the green or blue, I think that's green dots on the screen. good cross-section. I think that's what I want to get across here is it's, like I said, every corner of the state. Next slide, please. And so here's what we're finding with the targeted method. So EPA method 533 looks for 25 analytes of PFAS. And here they are, the 25 listed at the bottom. And this is a detection graph. This is what we're detecting on PFAS. Basically, are we finding it or not? We have other slides on the concentration. Well, how much of it are we finding? That's what Wendy will cover in the next couple slides. But we'll do a bit of a back and forth on detect, followed by concentration. So for method 533, we have roughly 1 in 10 wells, a 10% detection rate of PFAS. I believe that's a better odd than I anticipated going into this, at least on the targeted method. You also note that we don't have detections on much of the right side of the graph. Those are the analytes that may be considered more modern or newer analytes or versions of PFAS. We don't see those. We just see one well, I believe, that has the 6.2 FTS. It's just a slight bump on there. So the ethers and the fluorotelomers under the targeted method tell a bit of a story. The impact of PFAS, in fact, I think it suggests 3 considerations. We either don't have that, or there's some degradation occurring during the fate and transport from the exposure to the environment to where the drinking water well is picking it up. Or I had a third one and I'm blank. Well, regardless, we are going to be looking at various avenues of thought due to the lack of those PFAS. Next slide, please. And here's where Wendy will describe the concentrations of the detections that we're finding.
So based upon EPA method 533, right, those analytes that we actually have a detection for, they are here categorized between the carboxylates and the sulfonates. So this is where this is the fun part, Dan. But as you said, we have been only seeing these analytes. We have only been seeing these analytes since we almost started in regards to drinking water. We have some other occurrences like 6.2 FTS that are much closer to an actual release site. But otherwise, drinking water is pretty holding steady in regards to these kind of known sulfonates and carboxylates. This represents about 2,000 samples so far, and all these samples are collected at the well prior to treatment. Our current median concentrations, there's 2 analytes on here that have been most known and most studied. That's PFOA, PFOA, and PFOS, PFOS. In relation to the federal MCL, the median concentration for so far is 3.5 nanograms per liter for PFOA, which is below 4 nanograms per liter. However, PFOS has a bit higher. These box plots essentially shows the distribution and spread in regards to what we are seeing. It does not include the outliers, but those boxes really represents that middle 50% of the data that exists in regards to the sampling effort. But overall, our concentration spread is really less than 20 nanograms per liter. And most of the data is even much, much lower than that, even 10 nanograms per liter. Next slide.
So back on the presence aspect of what we're finding, and by the way, the blank that I missed on the prior slide, there was 3 indications of degradation. We don't have it, or those particular analytes are sticky and staying at the source site. So there may be some partitioning in the fate and transport. I think those are the 3 points I wanted to get across. But back to this slide. Beyond the targeted methods, with the AOF that we chose, looking at total mass, we have a presence of 30%, 36% of our wells have AOF presence. And so that's a higher detection rate than the targeted method. One interesting point with the AOF is that our resolution, our detection limits are fairly high. They're sitting at around 600 to 700 parts per trillion. We are working on bringing that resolution down, with a higher confidence level, we believe we could hit 200 parts per trillion. But if we do have a lower resolution, I believe that number would even be higher. We'd have higher than 36% presence or detection rate in our wells of AOF, or total mass of PFAS. Again, AOF's not perfect. It has a low level of count, and it misses certain analytes. But we're working on that. The other item is the ultra shorts. One item that stands out quite strong here is 100% detection rate of trifluoroacetic acid, the TFA. Every well that we've looked in that we're measuring for TFA, we're finding it. However, the other two short chains, we are not seeing much of those at all, 8% and 3%. And in fact, there's 3 other analytes in the footnotes below that we have no detection of. So we seem to have slides that have a good story to it, and then, of course, an interesting aspect to each slide. We're finding this fascinating as we move forward, what the impact in California looks like.
Can I add something to that,
Please.
Dan? So the analysis was done where we are sampling every single well for method 533 and absorbable organic fluorine, AOF. Due to budgetary considerations, we had to do a subset of those samples, and those are being analyzed for the ultra shorts and the non-target. So essentially, that graph of the ultra shorts only represents that subset, about 350 samples.
Okay.
Next slide. Here our box plots have returned. So for AOF, we have a much larger spread in regards to the y-axis in regards to concentration. So our median concentration is about 1,200 nanograms per liter for absorbable organic fluorine. And for TFA, we have a median concentration of about 780 nanograms per liter. We have been doing some research across the globe in regards to trifluoroacetic acid. And currently, the Netherlands have a guideline of about 2,200 nanograms per liter for trifluoroacetic acid. So we're below that in regards to median concentration. We do have some other outliers that do exceed that. And in Germany, they do have a screening level of 10,000 nanograms per liter for groundwater. And since these are samples that are collected out of the well. So a lot of the countries around the globe are also doing a lot of studies on TFA, and everybody is gathering data to kind of understand the occurrence in regards and presence for it. So.
Yeah, although the short chain analysis, it sounds like it was about 300 wells, a subset. Do you think that 100% TFA hit, if we were to expand the number of wells that we grabbed, would probably remain consistent at that point?
Yes, and in fact, the 300 wells were selected to be sure that we had good coverage across California. And
Yep.
so it is, although smaller than 3,000 wells, 300 is still a very good subset for data.
Really appreciate that. And I know, folks that may be listening in, we're throwing a lot of acronyms, and it can get very concerning as to, what we're finding or the safety of one's water supply. But I think important to remember this is all very much emerging, especially on TFA. This is something, as Wendy said, the international community at this point is aware of. It is everywhere, but the health effects are still not as quantified, say, as PFOS or PFOA or some of the other analytes out there.
That is correct, and it is generally believed that the shorter chains do not accumulate and therefore less toxic. And so TFA is a 3-chain and considered an ultra short PFAS.
Next slide, Dan.
Yep. So here we have a good old heat map. What this is a correlation of basically analytes with each other. On the x-axis mirrors the y-axis. So what you look for is any correlations. If concentrations go up, do other analytes respond in the same fashion? What this helps with, this type of graph, is looking for clusters. What analytes show up with other analytes? What analytes respond to other analytes? And this might inform us as we move forward with a class approach on a treatment tech level. Again, this graph has some white spots, and there's some good news with that. We do not have enough information or data to draw correlations with everything that you see on the x-axis that is white. So that's good news. The blue indicates lower correlations. Doesn't necessarily indicate presence, but they do not correlate with the other analytes. However, as you saw in our detections on the 533, the carboxylates and the sulfonates, we do have correlation. We have the light salmon colored up to the red being the higher correlations. So what we're seeing is the carboxylates, probably through degradates, certainly match each other or correlate, as do the sulfonates. To a lesser degree, but they still show a bit of a degradation and probably a partitioning or a grouping, so to speak. I'll pause on this slide for a moment because there's a lot to take in on this one. Okay, next slide. This is I'll start with the federal MCLs. Currently, 6 analytes are proposed to have an MCL. There is a current effort under the new administration to roll back or rescind 4 of those analytes. However, until that action is formal and takes place, the 6 analytes with their MCLs are in place. We plan on moving forward and with these 6 analytes until we hear different. And this is a snapshot of our testing, what it looks like where we have exceedances of those 6 MCLs. California's in a fairly good spot considering the proposed rescission in that mostly our exceedances are PFOA and PFOS. Those are the 2 analytes that are proposed to stay under the rescission. As you can see, that covers most of the wells that we have. We do have some PFH excess showing up, but not in abundance. It's roughly a 2 to 3% detection rate per well. But the other 3 analytes on here are really not key players in California. So we're in a good spot regardless of the federal outcome of the MCLs. It's also important to note that PFOA and PFOS are the challenges to treat for with granulated activated carbon and ion exchange. Once you're treating for those, you're picking up most of the other analytes regardless. So it's a good indicator. PFOA and PFOS right now are probably the backbone of the PFAS regulation, but we're exploring more, and as you'll see in some of our NTA charts, there's a lot more in the water. Next slide, please.
All right, we're going to talk about non-target analysis here from here until for 3 slides. And so this is our transition slide to try to move to understanding targeted to what non-target analysis kind of means. So targeted is where we have known chemicals, right? We know what they are. There are only a few, right? There are a lot less in the targeted chemical space that we know of within PFAS. There are 25, maybe now there's about 30. Some labs are now up to 72. And they're all in focused testing methods. We know their structure, we know what they are, and there are available analytical standards and there are available testing methods. We use EPA method 533, and we went with EPA method 1621 for AOF, and we also did our ultra shorts. Now we kind of move ourselves into that kind of discovery mode, right? We're going to move to the space where we don't really know, right? We use high-res mass spectrometry to kind of give an idea what those chemicals could be with some level of confidence. There are different levels of confidence in regards to the identification of those chemicals based upon their actual spectra and what they are. They could be, in drinking water, as Dan is mentioning, can be degradates of other things. And so things then start kind of getting a little wiggly, right, on what this actual chemical could be based upon the chemical signature. But we do have an existing spectra library provided by EPA ORD, and others around the globe have been adding to this library based upon chemicals that they actually been analyzing at the source sites, actually at the chemical industries, to add that information. So we're talking about non-targeted spectrometry here based upon a known kind of library list. And there could be some analytical standards that are available for some of these, but usually it's very limited. And so you use advanced chemical identification tools, software that actually picks those peaks and tries to determine what that chemical is. As you move from targeted to non-targeted, you can probably imagine that the expertise required goes up exponentially in regards to the analysis of non-target. The complexity of the data and the volume of the data is also exponential, and as well as the cost. And that is why we had only had the budget to do a subset for non-target. And we are doing all of it. We're doing full non-target, where we are using that entire library, and we're determining what chemicals are in that library and have been identified in those wells, whether they have a fluorine or they do not have a fluorine. Are they fluorinated or are they not fluorinated? Next slide, please. So our study questions were in regards to non-target analysis was what PFAS, let's start from the original objective, what PFAS chemicals are present in those samples and what are not traditionally sampled for or seen. What are those non-fluorinated compounds that are present? Are there actually degradates present? You can actually, in the spectra or in those libraries, see those chemicals that are a degradate of others because they have been identified prior to. And then kind of move towards identifying what those chemicals, how are they actually associated with known uses in the industry. So based upon those confidence levels I was talking about, we are really confident about 94% of the data that we received that is identifying that compound. And about 6% we're not as confident in. Now, as we finish this project, our laboratory is going to go through the entire data set again. And the reason why we're going to do it again is because we are actually adding to the library. We're adding to the global library. We're adding to the identification of these compounds. So what may have not been identified when we first started may, based upon occurrence and presence, may now being identified. So we're going to have to go through the entire analysis again to make sure that we've got, whether that 6% will get lower, we'll see. So the pie chart essentially is showing that that gray, pie is that's where we're just not confident. We have about 53 compounds that we're not confident on. The blue has to do, they're actually fluorinated. There are 27 that currently do not have an existing EPA method associated with them. And then the other 22 are known. Those are ones that currently have an EPA method either on 533 and the drinking water side or actually on the non-drinking water side. There's a method that includes a lot more than that. The rest of that pie chart indicates the prevalence of, so far, our non-target analysis is showing that it's nearly 90% of the compounds, unique chemicals that we're finding in non-target, are not fluorinated. Next slide, please.
Just a
sorry.
real quick, if we could go back to this, the prior slide. What we expected going into this was a lot more of the blue slice of pie. we expected a much broader impact of PFAS or the smear of PFAS throughout the state. So one of the good take-home points of this slide is we're not seeing nearly the breadth of PFAS that we thought we'd find. Okay, next slide, please.
So by doing a lot of internet searching and we were trying to identify what these chemicals could be of use and their use in the industry. Now, some of these chemicals could have multiple uses in the industry. You could have some of these chemicals are in multiple wells as well. So you have that compounding factor. But what we got down to are these these uses of industry over on the left. I believe there's nine of them. And the pie chart kind of gives a breakdown of their ratio of them that we have identified so far. So more to come in regards to this, and we'll continue searching and see to add to the data. Next slide.
Next slide, please. And so future actions, what do we plan on doing from here? Well, as I mentioned, we have the 2022 order in play, looking for PFAS where we thought we were going to find it. That's a large order with a lot of systems. The next item that will be coming up that Darren will be presenting on is adjusting and adding some advisory levels to our PFAS. And so the 2022 order, depending on the outcome of that, will be updated and amended to include those updates or revisions to levels. The 2024 order that we currently have out, like I said, it's a one-time testing, so we're 70% done, and we hope to wrap that up early 26, and then that order will expire. Then in 2026, starting in January, we hope to issue a new order that picks up those wells that have not yet tested here in the state in order to comply with the federal monitoring period under the current PFAS rule. It gets a little complicated in that the rule allows for grandfathering. And we've had many DDW orders out for PFAS testing. We've had the 2024 order out currently. We had UCMR 5 testing that's permissible with to comply with the monitoring period, plus some other voluntary testing. So what we're doing here in DDW is to perform an analysis on those specific systems that don't have that set of data. And we're providing a specific order at which quarter those systems should sample to comply with the federal monitoring period to help reduce the confusion. We will publish this order in the near future for public comment and feedback before we issue in 2026. Lastly, CDFA, many thanks to them for completing and continuing with the development of the analytical method for TFA. That is almost complete, I believe, or it is complete. And then what we continue to do is, as Wendy mentioned, that's not on here, is to refine our methods. AOF is not perfect. We're also going to look at EOF, which is another industry standard that certain nations are using for a total mass approach. What we learn from AOF, we may apply to EOF. So we've got some experiences and some wisdom that we plan on continuing on with to find a great method or a better method for looking at total mass of PFAS. Next slide, please. And that concludes our first impressions of the 2024 order and sampling data. Pretty sure we'll stick with the same trends, but if we see anything different, we'll certainly notify. And that, any questions, happy to answer.
Just an incredible amount of thanks, first and foremost, to the team, and importantly, all the partners that it's taken to actually move this project forward. Really glad we were able to focus some federal dollars into this, and I appreciate the midway check-in here. You know, mixed news, certainly. I mean, first and foremost, the fact that the incidences aren't as expansive as we perhaps were concerned of when it came to PFAS in disadvantaged communities or just in the wells in the state generally. It not being as bad as, you know, we may have feared is good, and that's good news. It's not as inextensive of a problem that we perhaps thought, but still, concerning. And I guess my question would be just for the systems that you are working with, and I know we don't like have a list out yet of, who's detected or where, but when communities are through this process, finding, say, even like higher detections, are you all working with the system right away? Just kind of wondering what the follow-up is with the systems themselves as they go through this testing process with us.
Yes, a great question. We do have, as we find detects under the 2024 order, our team, Sac State, Geosyntec, and Babcock Labs, along with internally, we are watching those levels, and when they are triggered at certain concentrations, again, Darren will cover that with notification levels, advisory levels, or pardon me, response levels as they increase. We have different health-based advice and packets that we're handing out to the water systems, which includes links and access to DFA funding. And so our boots on the ground Geosyntec is delivering those to the water systems. In addition, our district engineers who are located out in the fields are aware and then can immediately reach out and walk these systems through what we know and how to approach it.
Really appreciate that. And again, I know that there can be a lot of concern from folks as we talk about PFAS and the safety of water at their tap, and want to just continue to emphasize we have the strongest standards in the nation here as a state when it comes to the safety of our water. PFAS here, obviously an emerging and issue that we continue to try to grapple our arms around, but it shouldn't scare folks from the tap. And, if anything, all of this work should provide confidence to the public that we are taking this health threat seriously, and using data and information to really, again, figure out how best we wrap our arms around this. And to your point, looking at a treatment technique or a more, class-based approach here, understanding that as we see, it is a big iceberg that we're kind of chipping away at. And I think we're wanting to make sure we take as comprehensive an approach as we can so that we can continue to make sure that we're just ensuring the health and safety of the water supplies here in the state. So just really incredible amount of thanks for all this work, truly. Looking to fellow board colleagues if they have any other questions or comments right now. Board Member McGuire.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation and the information. It's a lot to unpack. It's a lot to think about what this means for our water systems, frankly. I think seeing data like the ultra short analysis where we're seeing the 100% detection rate. I appreciate the caveats and the fact that there's really a lot we don't know about that yet, what it means from a health perspective. But it is eye-opening for sure to see that kind of frequency of occurrence. And certainly our goal here is to ensure the safety of drinking water for the public. We're doing that, to the chair's point about having the highest standards in the state. I guess where I'm going with this is one thing that I've wondered is, as our detection limits and our laboratory capabilities grow, it seems like the number of compounds that we are starting to appreciate exist in the environment and in our water matrices is expanding as well. And we have limited resources to address water quality challenges. I mean, it's just not an infinite amount of dollars and treatment, even technologies at this point to address all of these issues that could exist that we're starting to get our arms wrapped around. So one area that I've been interested in for quite some time now is better understanding what our strategy is on contaminants of emerging concern. And I think that's what we're talking about today. Mm-hmm. You went into the non-targeted analysis where you mentioned that there's 700 non-PFAS compounds. I don't know what all those are. I don't know what the priority is. I don't know what the detection levels are of each of those compounds. But I would imagine as time goes on, we'll start to get a better understanding of what those are. And then how they fit into the hierarchy of all the other compounds, some of which we know already. We know we're trying to deal with PFAS strategically, looking at a class-based treatment approach. I appreciate that work. But I guess just want to hear your thoughts about the big picture. How do we approach this world that we're starting to unpack in terms of a strategy or measures to understand, what are those contaminants that we're facing against the resources that we have to address them?
Yeah, thanks, Board Member McGuire. Excuse me. It is a tricky question to get into that. I think the reality of the moment is we've been responsive to actions that come at us based on understanding of health impacts, and so we've been more reactive than we have been able to plot a course ahead. This DAC study is kind of the first time we've been able to venture out and look at what's maybe over the horizon that wasn't seen. So it's a first foray into that. But, we do need to keep focus. I'm always worried about the new shiny things that draw our attention, and PFAS, quite honestly, is one of those. We still suffer from a large amount of arsenic contaminated water systems, and that's a known poison, and I don't think anybody is going to say otherwise about that. And so we do have to work on our messaging around keeping us grounded on, what we know is an impact, where those are at, how we're working to address those. But the public wants to know what else is there. And of course, that's, the struggle that we're working through on these. So I don't have a great answer. We don't have a huge funded program. As you saw, we pulled together a lot of partners in this DAC testing. And one of those major partners is now pretty much dismantled at the federal level, most unfortunately. So it's going to be some tough days ahead for trying to figure out as a group where we go. The other key part of what you mentioned is the health understanding. And of course, the next presentation will be a bit on that and our partnership with OEHA. We're lucky in this state to have that ability. We're one of very few states, I can count them on one hand, that have toxicologists on staff or as part of their state systems that look at water and how it impacts people and render their kind of determinations alongside EPA regarding that aspect of it. So we do want to continue to focus on that aspect. And of course, our resource there is very limited. It's covering the ones that are either the federal MCLs that are pressing on us, or the ones that we've, as a group through our priority process worked to identify as kind of key and broadly impacting the state. So later this fall, for instance, we'll be talking about manganese. There was a updated health advisory on that. And so, we've taken that to heart and working there, as well as looking back at arsenic. It's on our priority list for the board as well, because it is still such a broad impact and at a level that is still pretty high, not as health protective as possible. So yeah, it's tough. I hope to get a little better plan here for you to going forward, but I don't have a great one on the shelf or a multi-million-dollar research program to really get after it. So
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I know I've asked about this a few times. And part of this is an opportunity to reach out as well to the broader water community to get some thoughts and recommendations and input on what we can do with limited resources and emerging science to try and get shift from being a little bit on the reactive side to being more on the proactive side as we go forward. This is a long investment. This doesn't happen overnight, but I think we can put something together that can help better address and provide certainty and maybe a little bit of peace of mind in terms of the strategies that we might use to address this big challenge.
And if I could put one more thing forward too, I guess from my experience in drinking water and this work that we're doing here and the continuously finding of these type of materials, especially these ones that are man-made and introduced into the environment, it does beg the question of when are we going to look at source controls and when are we going to ask the industries that make these to address the health impacts ahead of time before they release them into the environment. The reality is we all suffer dramatically from some of that and have, of course, benefited as an economy, but those are some bigger questions, and of course, the Division of Drinking Water can answer. But I think all drinking water systems and everybody that works in this field, feels put upon in some way by that externalized costs from those industries, and therefore, that is something that hopefully in the future does get addressed.
Yeah, here. Really hope they do, and agree the point. Appreciate the points and agree, board member, just around always wanting to try to do better, but unfortunately we're reactive because we have a reactive system, right? Where these chemicals are released into use, and they're become widely used, and then it's after the fact that we then understand their public health impacts and find ourselves in these moments. And so, to Mr. Bolhamis's point, I think if we're really going to get away from a reactionary position, then we need a more comprehensive approach when it comes to these chemicals introduction into our environment to begin with. Yeah. Board Member Firestone.
Yeah, and piggybacking on the conversation and points that have already been made, it's scary to see a chemical in 100% of the wells and not have great health impacts data yet. And it's great. I feel comforted that indications are that's not the most dangerous chemical, and that and I fully agree with your points, Mr. Polhemus, about we have known poisons like arsenic that we have been dealing with, and emerging contaminants. A real challenge is that we don't have all the information about health impacts either, and I know we're going to talk about, obviously, bring in OEHA's role, but are there efforts? Can you just speak a little bit more? I think the challenge is we're talking about tens of thousands or many thousands of chemicals, just as we have highlighted the challenge of going chemical by chemical to be able to develop detection methods and all of that. It seems like we have probably that same challenge with determining health impacts. And then there's also the sort of potential for cumulative or, ways that they interact. Just since that's not at our agency, can you just give me a sense of how that is approached and how we work with, I know we'll talk about how we work with OEHA, but what are the opportunities and approaches given that challenge of understanding health impacts?
Yeah, no, that's great. And I know Dr. Banks is sitting behind me. If he would want to come on up and join me now, we can introduce him into the conversation as well while I'm kind of going through what I've seen. And it's kind of interesting, if we go back to 2018, 2017, that was when we were first learning about PFOA and PFOS. And we didn't really know the health impacts of them. And there's this process that kind of unfolds of like detection, but there's no health studies on it. And then we kind of do enough monitoring to go, oh, it's a lot of places, so maybe there should be health studies. That seems to spur on then the academics to do the health studies, and then we come back. And that has been the one chemical approach at a time. But I do know through conversations with our compatriots at OEHA and Dr. Banks about some of the efforts they're doing with, I believe it's called Read Across, and some other efforts to try to jump over. So I'd definitely invite him to comment on that if he'd like.
Yes, I can definitely say at OEHA we are definitely interested in trying to handle the totality of PFAS instead of going chemical by chemical. Traditionally, we do assessments on a chemical by chemical basis, and we have done that for some of the better studied PFAS, for PFOA and PFOS, for example. Moving forward, though, it is quite the challenge because these 10,000 PFAS, they don't all behave in the same way, both in terms of their the kinetic properties of how they behave in the body. Their toxicities are different. We see wildly different properties just across the PFAS spectrum, even with chemicals that have very similar structures, where you see some major differences. So there are a number of hurdles that we are trying to overcome. We are trying to identify similarities among classes and groups of PFAS so that they can be grouped together and classified together, which would also address the idea of the cumulative impacts that was mentioned. This is definitely a priority for us, but it is not an easy thing for us to address. And we do have a lot of folks working on trying to come up with ways to go faster than just one chemical at a time. It is a priority for us to do so.
Thanks. Uh, and I guess just piggybacking on another point that was raised is around source protection. Obviously, I mean, you know, this is true. Utilizing and allowing use of chemicals where we don't even have a method of detection and we don't understand their, potential impact is really having huge impacts on, and we've seen that over and over again, cycle after cycle, I think, in this state already. But there's also source protection in terms of what Division of Water Quality does and our regional boards do for protecting sources of drinking water, groundwater and surface water. And I know we have we've had other presentations on the research and sampling that we're learning about in terms of risks. I'm wondering, foremost in my mind these days is, we're trying to transition more and more to water recycling, advanced treatment in terms of water recharge. Can you just speak a little bit to how PFAS, the potential treatment within water recycling projects to address PFAS in terms of water recharge and advanced treatment?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And the results so far really indicate that when we go through the processes we've ascribed for direct potable reuse and indirect potable reuse with a reverse osmosis barrier, that eliminates all of the PFAS. It doesn't make it through the barrier there on a chemical component. So while it's not destroyed, it's moved over to the reject water, of course, so it's not treated out. It's just not then part of the water that's delivered for drinking water or for indirect recharge. So that's very good news from that standpoint. It still means we have an environmental problem, of course, in those projects that we need to be conscious of because we've concentrated more than PFAS as well, other materials through the RO water, and need to make sure that we're conscious of that and its impacts.
Yeah, great. And then that's good news. And I think then goes back to just closing the loop on our water quality regulatory programs. As we're seeing these pretty huge financial impacts as well in terms of, there's potential health impacts, but as we're requiring treatment and ensuring that people are protected, that increased costs, and it means, consumers are having to pay for high water costs as well. Are there examples or ways that we anticipate bringing in updates to our water quality protections to address some of these chemicals? I'm thinking about, we have, I always, because I've lived and worked a lot in intensive agricultural areas, I've seen 123 TCP, for example, is one where there's ways that our regulatory programs need to be looking at how that could be continued. We could protect groundwater further from contaminants that are impacting our drinking water supplies. So I think my question is more, can you just speak a little bit to how our feedback loop works with Division of Water Quality for bringing in and identifying water quality protections that to address some of the drinking water contaminants in our, like throughout our regulatory programs. And I guess specific to PFAS, you don't need to.
Yeah, I could speak towards in regards to our next phase is really trying to understand what those industries within the state of California are really releasing significant concentrations, right? And this effort is providing us a lot of information on what those could be, right? We wouldn't have that information if we didn't do the non-target or anything like that, and really is giving us an idea what those chemicals could be. And so from working there, we will be working in the future in regards to understanding what those industries within the state of California are actually are releasing significant concentrations used through significant industrial users or categorical industrial users in that state. And that will be one way that we're working upstream to find alternatives for that industry, to try to find an alternative there if there is an alternative, so that we can reduce that base load that comes into the wastewater treatment. As an example, we will not be able to reduce the entire load, as you probably are aware, because of the residential component that PFAS is associated with, but at least let's reduce the industrial load into the wastewater treatment plant system.
And if I could add, so a lot of that work that Wendy's mentioning is actually driven by your first question around DPR and IPR, understanding that we have that waste stream that we're going to have to deal with, and the fact that wastewater seems to be an accumulator from many different points of industries in their environment and commercial use and residential use and everything. So there is a bunch of work with those that are contemplating DPR in the future and the pretreatment programs that we would want to see around that, and trying to work into that space to try to get a feel for that. We had a recent report the other day that Michigan, in one of their efforts, was able to reduce their PFAS load into their wastewater treatment plant by 90% in their pretreatment program. So that gave us some great excitement, and we're trying to explore more on that to try to figure out how to go into that space, because we may not get rid of it all, but if we can reduce it substantially, of course, that still is a huge benefit.
Yeah, many thanks. Appreciate the line of thoughts and questions, board member. I know, and to Mr. Polhemus, your point, a lot of this is at the state level right now. We're working a lot with our states and trying to, figure out how best we're responding. And a lot of the strategy is to turn the spigot off, get the PFAS presence out of products. I know that there's been several laws that have been passed here in the state when it comes to, like textiles and fabrics and consumer products. And so feels like we're going down the line of trying to turn off that spigot. And I know DTSC is an important partner across all of that. So definitely we're mid-journey. We're certainly
Yeah,
mid-journey.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we do have a Cali PA PFAS work group that is chaired by Wendy right now, actually runs the meetings for us. And Annalisa Kihara is also a key part of that from water quality. And of course, DDW participates in all the Cali PA agencies, and we all share what we're doing in each space. And there is basically activity in every single Cali PA agency. So it is broad reaching.
Much appreciation. All right, we have one commenter for this item and would like to now go to Eric Oriana.
Thank you, Chairman and board members and staff. I was just here to uplift the great work that the Division of Drinking Water has done on this work. It has been a significant effort, and I think the effort just points to the great work that federal and state partnership can do when we work together. And just wanted to, again, look forward to the completion and continuance of this work. Very vital, very important. And I think it has given us a lot of information and a lot to think about. I will also just wanted to note that I appreciate the draft fund expenditure plan for the SAFER program mentioned the inclusion of sampling domestic wells as another effort. And so I think that was something that we welcomed and we're excited to see as, this is a significant effort and Still, it does not include domestic well communities, so there's still a gap to fill there. But overall, I just really impressed with the work that DDW has done in this regard, and look forward to continue to see the work that goes on in the future. Thank you for that opportunity to comment.
And thank you for the partnership, Mr. Oriana. Appreciate your continued engagement on this. And actually, just comes to mind, I know and we're not here talking about the fund expenditure plan for the clean drinking water SRF, but there are emerging contaminant pots that we're trying to make sure we get to disadvantaged communities. And so here again, to the extent that we have data on small systems and disadvantaged communities that have PFAS hits, those are, ripe for potential projects for those pots out there. So hopefully we can start to get the wheels turning on some projects for communities as well here. Thank you. All right, looking to fellow board colleagues if there's anything further on this component of our PFAS update, because if you didn't have enough, we will now move on to our next item. Let's go ahead and give ourselves a quick 10-minute break just because we have a light schedule in the morning and gives us a little quick refresh. Let's get ourselves back here at about 10:15, and we will continue on to item number 6, since I switched the two, and then that'll be a discussion here on our PFAS notification and response levels. All right, thank you. See you here in 10 minutes. All right, everyone. It is 10:15. We can bring ourselves back. Appreciate the break. We're moving on to item number 6, where we'll hear an update on the proposed revised notification response levels for PFOA, PFAS, PFHXS, and proposed notification response levels for PFHXA. Good to see you all again.
you, Chair Esquivel.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for navigating the alphabet soup here. They all begin with P. That's all I can say. Yeah. Thank you. So we're going to begin item 6 here. I'll do the part of the presentation. I'll share it also with Dr. Banks, who's joining me from OEHA to cover the PFHXA proposed notification response level work from them. So we'll kind of march through this. So it's a couple things going together, as the title indicates, revising 3 items, 3 PFAS that we have notification level response levels for, and then a new one. So next slide, please. And this, I mentioned, we'll be presenting. And next slide. Okay, little background. What are notification response levels? So they're derived out of Health and Safety Code 116-455. And the best way to kind of couch them is that they're advisory levels per this statute. So when we are made aware of health impacts associated with compounds that we find in drinking water, this statute sets up a process by which we proceed with advising both the governing bodies of water systems as well as then the levels of public advisory that's there. So these are non-regulatory in their impact. They are not an MCL, but I think they're contemplated in the context of the regulatory process takes a while to catch up with and address those. And we, of course, want to be providing information to the public around what we know at the moment, obviously capping on that with any uncertainty that we also have at the time. But this is the process for NLRLs. And kind of the distinction between them is the notification level generally has been where we want the water system to be aware. We do recommend that they talk to their public about it, but it's not as driven. And then we get to the response level. We have some safety factors built in where we think at that level of a material, then we want them, well, we advise them to contemplate actions associated with addressing that ahead of a regulatory limit being in place. And again, it's a recommendation. Next slide, please. With PFAS, there's a special add in statute that was added, 116378, that does extend a requirement for notification to the public. So while under 116455, there's recommendations about notifications, there's not a requirement. Under 116378, when you have a monitoring order from us and you detect PFAS, then you are required to follow the statutory notification requirements that are listed here for RLs, and then there's some for NLs as well when you have to put it in the CCR and some other components with that. The choices are do that public notification or remove the source from service. So now we're kind of walking into a gray area between, it's not regulatory still, but it is a statutory requirement that requires action on the water system's behalf associated with then the NLRLs that we have issued associated with that. And so, again, these only apply to PFAS. Okay, next slide, please. So the process by which we also establish the NLRLs was modified not too long ago with 116456, where we are here today doing a public information hearing associated with that to take public input as well as input from the board before issuing those notification response levels. I should note the authority for issuing those still is delegated to me via statute. So the Deputy Director of Division Drinking Water is the one that does that. But of course, we want to gather information from advisory board, the board, and the public associated with that before we do that. There's a public noticing that goes ahead of that as well so that we can seek public input associated with that, and take all that into consideration before we move. I will note that there is also, in the case of some kind of emergency find associated with some compound, that we can take action first and then come back and repeat the hearing or have the hearing and stuff after the fact, and then making adjustments from there. So those are the provisions associated with putting those into place. And so we're in that process today for PFOA, PFOS, and PFHXS, as well as PFHXA, then in a new instance associated with it. Next slide, please. I just wanted to recover or recount the previous notification levels recommendations we received for the materials, and then the new one that we have, and you see the dates associated with these here. Do note that on PFOA, PFOS, and PFHXS, the levels are below what we can detect. So the notification level recommendation is something at a smaller quantity than is quantifiable with the methods we have for testing, which means then that we kind of pop up to whatever that test level is for establishing an NL, because you have to be able to see it to say it's there, to say that then that would be the notification level you would work from. What you often see then is kind of have a general rule associated with where we set the RL level, depending on whether it's a cancer-based health impact or a non-cancer, of either multiplier by 10 or 100 of the NL number. And we've basically, for the most part, stuck with using that against the NL recommendation and not the test method. Obviously, that would make sense that it's a compounding of the health impact, not the detection limit. So there's some difference there that shows up with PFAS that maybe wasn't there in previous NL-RLs, just because of the fact that we're in the nanograms per liter or parts per trillion zone, which is new for us with compounds at a really, really small level. Next slide, please. So these are the current PFAS notification response levels that, for the ones that have been issued. I've put a little red star there as well to highlight that there's a difference in that though response levels for PFOA and PFOS are on a running annual average. And for PFHXS, when we established the RL at 20, it was a single confirmed sample. That was because PFHXS at the time, the health component is considered to be non-cancer, so it's a shorter term health impact. And traditionally with cancer-based or long-term health impacts, we use a running annual average to smooth it out over time, since it's a long exposure window that we're considering the health impact on, whereas with non-ones in PFHXS was thyroid impact, if I'm correct, and Dr. Banks can kick me if I'm not, but was associated with a shorter window of impact. So we did keep that as a single confirmed sample. It was the only one that was like that, so it was a bit of an outlier, and it makes a bit of difficulty associated with water systems and their monitoring regime and how they ran through that. Next slide, please. So here now I've shown the changes in red that we're proposing and taking comment on and discussion about. So for PFOA and PFOS, we are proposing that the notification level be reduced down to 4. The 5.1 and the 6.5 you see there in the existing notification levels were the detection levels at the time we set those. Really, the ability to detect in lab techniques have allowed us to go lower. The 4 is also US EPA's MCL that exists as of today associated with those. So that is a key component. The response levels we are proposing to not change at this point. There is an MCL in place that has time schedules associated with addressing it, and in honor of that, we know water systems are going to work towards that through their sampling component and try to get there in the time of the MCL kicking into place. So we're going to leave those to place. The 4 also helps us match with US EPA's MCL on testing. As Dan mentioned earlier, we're going to work with the water systems in a new order that'll we believe, start first quarter of 2026. That will allow us to complete the pre-monitoring for the MCL component that's in the federal rules. So having that kind of harmonized makes a bunch of sense to us. The PFHXS component, we're leaving the notification level, so no change to that. But what we are proposing to do is to lower the response level from 20 single confirmed sample to a 10 running annual average. So you see there that we are changing the period of time associated with that. This is also mirroring USCPA's MCL. This is what they have done for PFHXS. In their materials associated with it, they discuss the fact that they recognize that PFHXS is a non-cancer endpoint, but they have taken that into consideration and retained the running annual average and set the level in accordance so that it maintained that shorter term safety, even though it was a running annual average component. So again, mirroring what they have done there, that's what we propose to do. It'll improve and make it easier on water systems to continue the running annual average for all of their sampling and not have this one outlier. It maintains, we believe, the health protectiveness associated with our previous 20 now to 10, and provides some other benefits associated with that. I do want to note now that all of these numbers, the 4 and 4 for PFOA and PFOS and the 10 for PFHXS are one significant figure. So go through a little bit of this. This gets a little mind-bending here, but so the 10 means that the ones place is the only significant figure. The 0 doesn't count. There's no period or decimal point after the 0. So the reality is that a measurement of 14 would be rounded to 10, and a measurement of 15 would be rounded to 20. I know, I make the same face, Board Member McGuire. It's a little bit awkward, especially when we're seeing it in this notation. So the flip on it is we often do the notation in milligrams per liter, and then it's 0.000001 with no trailing zeros. And of course, when you're dealing with math in that way, you would say that the 0, if it's 4, it stays 1. If it's 5, you round up the significant figure you're at. So it really just kind of messes with our head when we're presenting it as a part per trillion number rather than a milligram per liter or, switching back and forth. So something that we will want to contemplate when we actually set our own MCL associated with this, whether we want to retain that singular one. We do believe at this point, though, since we are relying on USCPA's approach, that we should follow that as well, even though instinctually it's a little hard for me to stick with that significant figure at that point. So we may just want to make sure that we switch our notation on that and use micrograms per liter. So now it's in a decimal place position or something like that, and maybe express it all the ways, but it is a little awkward when it's at a part per trillion. Another little, sorry, going to geek out on you for a second here, but another thing that, we often contemplate when we're in the part per trillion zone, and was a question that popped into my head, like how many molecules are really in a liter when we're in the part per trillion zone? So I did the math. Of course, being an engineer, I have to do the calculations, right? So it only goes to demonstrate how hard it is for us as humans to contemplate really small numbers and really big numbers. And at a concentration of 10 parts per trillion for PFHXS specifically, if you do the molecular calculations, in a liter of water, there are 4.7 billion molecules of PFHXS. So there's a lot in there. It's not just 1 or 2 molecules floating around in a liter. So it's, depending on how you display the numbers, changes your perception of what we're talking about in components here. And oftentimes the parts per trillion numbers think like, well, you often hear 1 drop and multitudes of Olympic pools, but you forget in that 1 drop has billions of molecules itself, and if it's fully concentrated, and then you spread it out. So I just reminded me when I took chemistry a long time ago, and Avogadro's number is a really, really big number at e to the 23 or 10 to the 23 times. So um, hard to get your head around that. So sorry for geeking out, but it just kind of shows the numbers on how you display them really create your impression more than they maybe should. Next slide, please. Okay, so impacts to the proposed change. And I've on red to make it glaring here, really tried to emphasize that the numbers I'm about to give you here in the below bullet points are an incredible worst case scenario using a single max sample from a well. So it's like the worst possible scenario you could come up with, presuming that they sample this number or worse from their worst one going forward. So for PFHXS, RLs change from 20 to 10. If you removing the count of wells that already have PFOA or PFOS, so this is kind of key. We've noticed, as you saw from Dan and Wendy's presentation, there's a lot of co-occurrence. And if a water system is probably already dealing with PFOA and PFOS before PFHXS comes into play. But if you look at where PFHXS changed from 20 to 10, has an impact from the data we have at the moment. So definitely another caveat. It looks like about 41 system or 67 wells may have to address that in a very worst case scenario. Again, we're going to have a running annual average. This was their worst day ever type of scenario. And, we're operating in this range between 20 and 10. So a lot of these systems are not in, it's not a big variation. So I don't actually think this many systems will have to address it, but I wanted to present like this was the best way to count it. It's really hard to run the running annual average. And you're also looking at old data, not going forward. And we know that some of these compounds are in a reduction or slight decline over time. So again, I would be very skeptical of the 41 number, but did want to present that using this in a worst case scenario, this is what we could conceivably see in the absolute worst way of the planets lining up for everybody. For PFOS, the NL change from 6.5 to 4 does look like it could be 51 wells. Same caveats all apply. This is the worst case scenario associated with a single sample, and these are definitely running annual averages associated. Well, sorry, for the NLs, we use a single sample. If it's above, then the notification level does go into effect, which is basically a CCR notification that it was detected above this one number. And then for PFOA, it again was 41, oops, I made a typo there, 41 systems, 124 wells. Sorry about that. And that wraps up my presentation on this. I will call for the next slide, and Dr. Banks will begin going through the PFHXA, which is a new NLRL that we're contemplating. So this one doesn't exist at this point. And he'll go through the health components associated with that. So Dr. Banks.
All right, thank you very much. All right, so my name is Chris Banks, and I'm a senior toxicologist at the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, and I'm the chief of the water toxicology section. And so my section, we develop public health goals and notification level recommendations at the request of the Water Board. And a few years recently, we completed our notification level recommendation for PFHXA, and I will talk a little bit about how the number that we derived and how we got there. So next slide, please. All right, so I'll put the bottom line up front. The notification level recommendation that we had derived is for 1 microgram per liter, which is equivalent to 1 part per billion. So, and the rest of my portion of this talk, I'll discuss how we got to this point, how we got to 1 microgram per liter. So we started by doing a systematic literature search and going through all the available literature that we could find on PFHXA and toxicity and the pharmacokinetics involved with that. And we were able to identify slightly over 1,200 publications on PFHXA. We looked at the human epidemiology studies and we determined that they were not suitable for notification level derivation because there were not very many of them, and the ones that we did identify, they lacked clear and consistent associations with adverse health effects. So we screened all of these studies, and at the end of our screening process, we identified 7 peer-reviewed animal study publications that could potentially be candidates for the notification level. And from those 7, we looked in depth at 5 of those publications. So in total, there were 8 different animal studies within those 5 publications that were evaluated closely. Next slide, please. All right, so I'll briefly go through these 8 studies that we looked at. So Lovelace et al. 2009 did 3 separate animal studies. The first study was conducted in male and female rats and lasted for 90 days. And a number of adverse effects in multiple organ systems were seen, including the liver, kidney, thymus, thyroid, and the nasal cavity. And decreased body weight was also observed as well. The second Lovelace study was also involved male and female rats and slightly longer than 90 days, but this study also included pregnant females that were dosed with PFHXA throughout pregnancy, through gestation, and post-pregnancy and lactation as well. And from this study, we saw some developmental effects in terms of decreased body weight in pups, and the PFHXA also affected the body weight in the parents as well. The third Lovelace study focused just on pregnant females in pregnant female rats, and animals were dosed between days 6 and 20 of gestation, so throughout the latter stages of the pregnancy. And the authors reported decreased body weights in dams, so comparable to what was seen in the previous study, the 126-day study. Chengelis et al. Also looked at male and female rats and conducted a 90-day study as well, and they saw toxicities in multiple organ systems, including liver, kidneys, lipids, and effects of the blood as well, and decreased body weight. Next slide, please. So EY and Hoberman conducted 2 studies, 2 developmental toxicity studies in animals where pregnant female rats were given PFHXA from gestation days 6 through 20. And both studies did see developmental toxicity effects, including increased pup mortality in stillbirth, decreased body weight in pups, and in the higher dose study, the one where they went up to 500 milligrams per kilogram per day, they also saw some developmental delays and liver effects in the pups. The National Toxicology Program in 2019 conducted 28-day studies in male and female rats. And once again, we're seeing the multiple organs being affected by PFHXA, including liver, kidney, lipids, thymus, thyroids, and decreased body weight and nasal cavity effects as well. So we're seeing PFHXA has impacts on lots of different systems in the body. So it is affecting multiple physiological systems as well. And finally, Jiang et al. Conducted studies on male mice for 2 months, and they were predominantly looking at liver effects in this one. Next slide, please. All right, so after evaluating all of these studies and looking at all of the critical endpoints, we determined that the Lovelace et al. And the NTP studies in rats were the critical studies, or the ones that were most important for us for deriving the notification level. And from within these studies, the most sensitive and critical endpoints were nasal cavity degeneration and atrophy in female rats from Lovelace et al., and decreased thyroid hormone levels in male rats from NTP. Interestingly, nasal cavity effects and thyroid effects were observed in both critical studies. And thyroid effects are something that we consistently see across other PFAS as well when we are looking at the health effects. It is something that we see again and again, that thyroid and particularly liver and developmental toxicities are ones that are repeated. So it's not surprising that thyroid was a major player here. And whenever we see these thyroid effects, it does kind of raise a red flag for us because thyroid is an important endpoint to look at, in particular because small decreases in thyroid hormone are associated with altered cognitive development in children. So perturbating the thyroid homeostasis in children can really lead to problems in children. So this is something that we definitely want to pay a lot of attention to when we see it. Next slide, please. All right, so Using these two studies as our critical studies, we derived an acceptable daily dose. And to do so, we mathematically modeled the dose response data using benchmark dose software to identify what we call a point of departure, where it's or sort of point where we can start applying various factors to get to the notification level recommendation. And one thing interesting about PFAS is that PFAS chemicals in general, particularly some of these, the longer chain ones in PFHXA here, although not quite as long-lived as some of the other ones, there are big differences between how the chemical behaves in humans versus how it behaves in animals. These chemicals tend to be much longer lived in humans as compared to animals, and this is not explained by a simple change in body weight. So when we are looking at these doses, we need to convert the rat dose that was used in these studies to a human equivalent dose, keeping into consideration these kinetics differences between humans and animals. So we basically had to account for how quickly the chemical clears in humans versus rats. And in doing so, we applied a adjustment factor in our analysis. We also applied a composite uncertainty factor of 300 to account for any uncertainties that arise from these studies. And this factor of 300 is comprised of a square root of 10 to account for residual uncertainty and extrapolating from animals to humans. So basically to account for the differences between animals and humans and using an animal study to derive a human health protective value. A factor of 10 to account for human variability. Population variability is a big thing, and so we have a big factor to account for that. We have a factor of a square root of 10 to extrapolate from a subchronic to chronic exposure, because the two studies that we're looking at were of a duration of 28 days and 90 days, and we are extrapolating that to a lifetime of exposure, so we have an uncertainty factor for that. And finally, a factor of a square root of 10 for database deficiencies, because there were no immunotoxicity studies identified for PFHXA, which is a pretty big gap. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so to derive our health protective concentration, we applied a relative source contribution of 20%. And this number of 20% represents the proportion of exposures attributed to tap water as part of the total exposure from all sources. So you're going to get PFHXA exposure not just from water, but also from food, from ambient air, perhaps from indoor dust, or consumer products, other sources that basically are not drinking water. And we used our default value of 20% because there were just no specific data to give us the specific amounts coming from each individual source. And 20 is our most conservative value that we use. And so we are anticipating that more will come from food and indoor dust and other sources that are outside of drinking water. And we also used different drinking water intake rates based on the endpoint that was studied. So for the nasal cavity degeneration from Lovelace et al., we used our lifetime weighted average drinking rate, which takes into consideration different drinking rates at different stages of life. So infants and children will tend to drink more on a body weight basis, and this lifetime weighted average takes that into consideration. And for the decrease in thyroid hormone from NTP, we applied the drinking rate of infants from 0 to 6 months of age, because we identified that population as the most sensitive to these types of effects. And so because infants have much lower stores of thyroid hormone and are less able to tolerate decreases in adults, and they are much more susceptible to chemical exposures that affect the thyroid. Additionally, infants do have higher exposure to drinking water contaminants because they consume more water on a body weight basis than adults. And so we really wanted to focus on protecting infants at this stage, so we're using the infant drinking water rate. Next slide, please. Okay, so for decreased thyroid hormones in male rats and nasal cavity degeneration in female rats, once again, those were the most sensitive endpoints. And when we finished our calculations, we determined a health protective concentration of 0.8 parts per billion for both endpoints. So we got the same number using both of these endpoints together, which was, it's nice when it works out that way. And because these were the most sensitive endpoints, if we protect against these two, then all the other endpoints should also be protected as well. And so our final notification level recommendation is 1 part per billion, which we're rounding up from 0.8. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Darren.
Thank you. Next slide. So just summarizing what we've covered here, the 3 modifications to the top 3 rows there, and then of course the new recommended NRL. This is how they would read out per staff's recommendation at the moment. And the next slide is just questions. So we could leave this one up if we want, have that in front while we contemplate questions. So over to you, Chair.
Many, many thanks. And particular thanks to Mr. Banks and OEHA. Again, as Mr. Polhamus said, we're fortunate here in the state to have the resources and the toxicologists over at OEHA. So just thank you for the partnership. It's really appreciated. Just what's the timeline? This isn't a decision point for the board. The board isn't, here. This is just an informational item, but wondering what the timeline is generally you're thinking for these revisions.
Yeah, good question. Sorry, I didn't have that in the slide, but so we are here today to take comments. We'll see what comments come in, certainly from the presenters that are in the queue today, and then any written materials we get in. Generally, my thought is that we would issue these once we've kind of gone through that. Of course, if we get a really good comment, we need to dig into it. It'll take some time. If not, then probably in September, we'll do the issuance.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Looking to fellow board colleagues, if there's any questions or comments at this moment. We do have a few commenters, and so we can certainly hear from them. Look forward to. Our first commenter will be Megan Murphy, be followed by Nick Blair, then Tim Worley, and our last commenter will be Sue Mossberg. Good morning. Good to see you again.
Good morning. Day 2. Here we go. Good morning, State Water Board members and staff. I'm Megan Murphy, Senior Regulatory Advocate with the California Municipal Utilities Association, or CMUA. Together, we represent 75% of Californians. And I'd like to begin by expressing our appreciation for the opportunity to review and comment on the notification and response levels in advance of them being issued. CMUA and Orange County Water District actually co-sponsored AB 2560, which was signed into law as Health and Safety Code 116456 in 2020, and that legislation established a transparent and science-based process for setting advisory levels or notification and response levels for drinking water contaminants. CMUA members prioritize the protection of public health as a fundamental commitment to the delivery of safe and reliable drinking water and support the regulation of PFAS in drinking water. We just have 3 quick comments today. First is related to funding. Of course, as water systems work to meet existing and evolving standards, the state funding should be provided to support monitoring, treatment, and infrastructure needs to reduce the burden on ratepayers and to protect the human right to water. Second, it's CMUA's assertion that PFAS monitoring be at the point of entry to water distribution systems rather than at the source, because having the compliance point at the source in any rulemaking may restrict operational flexibility and lead to compliance challenges, complicating water systems operations, especially in regarding with blending groundwater, which allows for water utilities to maintain contaminant levels within the acceptable regulatory limits by mixing water from different sources. And finally, as the state moves toward setting MCLs for PFAS compounds such as PFOA, PFAS, and PFHXS, we encourage the board to not rely on the EPA's economic feasibility assessment. We don't think that adequately reflects the unique operational and financial realities of California water systems. And we urge the board to ensure the feasibility assessment is transparent and includes meaningful stakeholder engagement throughout the process. I think it was mentioned today that there's not unlimited resources to address these, and so we really do have to look at the right balance of cost and benefits, and just to kind of kickstart some of that economic feasibility in the later MCL process. There was a great article that compiled the actual costs from water systems that have installed PFAS in several states, and that's an AWWA study that came out in 2025. So there's some good stuff in there. So yeah, CMUA looks forward to being engaged in the future statewide monitoring order and the MCL setting process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really appreciate the good comments and good to see you again. Next, I'd like to call up Nick Blair, be followed by Tim Worley, and then Sue Mossberg.
Good. Good morning, Chair Esquivel, fellow board members. Nick Blair, Senior Policy Advocate with the Association of California Water Agencies. We represent around 470 public water agencies around the state, which accounts for about 90% of water delivered. Our members definitely uphold public health and want to comply with contaminant levels standards on all issues. And we appreciate having conversations with DDW in anticipation of these updates a few times already this year and getting notification early this year that this would be coming. I just wanted to relay, and I can appreciate this is an informational item, but I wanted to be sure to relay. We do have some members that are going to be implicated in that forecasted wells that are going to be, caught up in this, that it's possibly going to be a challenge for some of them. This is fast tracking the US EPA MCL monitoring requirements. For a number of them, they were going on that 5-year timeline to get into full compliance, and then the 3 years for monitoring. So I just wanted to relay that. We have some members who've noted that water systems in the process of upgrading online treatment plants are currently working to comply with current response levels, and then this is going to be piled on top of that. And then as I noted, in some cases, water agencies have a few wells that are going to be implicated by this. Others have a lot. And that, in some cases, this is agencies that are at the forefront of working on PFAS treatment. So definitely appreciate too that the discussion around capital costs, and we can appreciate that the Drinking Water SRF is doing more to address PFAS funding. So definitely want to be part of that conversation as that continues in the next month. And for those that do have wells that have to go offline, it is going to result in an increased cost of water due to having to import more. So definitely appreciate being part of this conversation. Want to continue having them as this goes along today and then in the future MCL process. So many thanks for the opportunity to comment today. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. Appreciate the engagement and comments. Next, I'd like to call up Tim Worley, and then our last commenter will be Sue Mossberg.
Chair Esquivel, I asked to comment if necessary. My comments would be on behalf of the California Nevada section of AWWA. And since Sue Mossberg, I believe, is on the meeting, I'll defer to her. Thank you.
Sounds good. Good to see you, Mr. Worley. Ms. Mossberg.
Thank
Good morning.
you.
Good to see you.
Good morning. Wow, it has been a busy morning already. Thank you. Good morning, members of the Water Board, staff. I'm Sue Mossberg, Executive Director of the California Nevada section of the American Water Works Association. As a reminder, California Nevada section broadly represents the California drinking water community with over 470 water systems, 4,700 individual members within the state. We do bring that technical expertise to the table. Our members work on a regular basis to meet regulations and answer questions from the community and customers that we serve. We see our organization and our members as partners in public health with the Division of Drinking Water and the State Water Board. We appreciate that you all recognize that. And we also appreciate the research and information that was reported this morning and what it's uncovering about a very large number of unknowns. The amount of work ahead, I think we all are just beginning to understand more. I did miss some parts of the presentation, but I think overall the comments that I prepared and that I'm going to share now are a result of what we understand and the direction that we're hoping things go in. We understand the reason for using notification levels and response levels in the periods before standards are set. However, we do have some concerns about this process in general and on some of the specific PFAS chemicals in this informational item. So specifically, the NL and RL notifications really are not understood by most of the public. and extremely low precautionary measures can undermine, not strengthen, the confidence in tap water. I'll note that even Mr. Polhemus today alluded to the confusion with the current and proposed measurement levels and their meanings. This is particularly true for PFAS, where there's growing evidence that water is not the most significant pathway of exposure. Yet, by many in the communities, it will be seen as the most harmful thing. Trying to uphold public confidence, drinking water utilities will typically act to avoid the NL and RL levels, essentially making these backdoor regulations, even if technically they impose non-mandatory actions. Actions by the water systems to respond to these extremely low NLs require the use of a lot of money that in some cases may be used for better known harms to the public health. I think being fiscally and financially responsible as we understand what is happening is really important. Since NL and RL changes under discussion today are the lead-ins to setting enforceable standards, we also have a few comments in regard to that pending step. So given the US EPA is currently in review process and potential changes, of course, may be anticipated on PFAS, some of which is for good reason, and occurrence data is still being analyzed, including what's reported on this morning, it makes sense to wait for more information to emerge. Statewide MCLs should provide meaningful opportunity for public health, and those locations may be isolated problems. Generally speaking, a statewide MCL for a particular substance is not warranted if a very limited number of public water systems have issues. It's also been shown that treatment for PFAS and PFOA, especially remove PFHXS, which need to be considered when focusing on that specific compound. We want to be on record that a hazard index approach is inappropriate for an MCL and should be used in California and should not be used in California proposed regulation. Blending needs to be recognized as a feasible control option. And finally, state regulation of these substances needs to provide additional time for MCL compliance, at least 5 years and possibly more. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mossberg. I do appreciate your concerns and here, voicing concerns from other water agencies as we proceed through the response level, notification level process. I will say that I feel that NLs and RLs have actually been helpful as we make our way to develop full MCLs because they start to signal certainly, and as you've mentioned, water agencies are acting off of them and actually makes us a bit more prepared for, I think, what is this work that the board has signaled it's looking to do in adoption of the MCLs. When it comes to, a potential pause because of some changes on the federal side, I think it's important to note that the feds at this point have not indicated that any of the health studies or information is what they're reevaluating, but in fact, just the economic cost benefit analysis that they did around the numbers. So I feel, when it comes to the health impacts and the clear need to respond to PFAS, it's certainly there, but appreciate and agree that we need to make sure we do so in a way that takes in consideration what are, a lot of things that our water agencies are managing through and provide here the opportunity for them to do right by the work. But I think it's important we keep some pressure on here because I don't see this as a health concern going away, and certainly as an actual presence of PFAS going away anytime soon in our systems. So, but appreciate the concern and advocacy for some balance here as we approach the work. So thank you, Ms. Mossberg. Looking to fellow board colleagues, that was the end of our commenters, but if there's anything further worth bringing up or discussing. Board Member McGuire.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to this. I think there are good comments and much appreciated the input from folks. The question I had was just to follow up on Ms. Murphy's comment regarding PFAS monitoring at the point of entry rather than at the source. I was just wondering if you could help me understand that a little bit better and what
Sure.
that means.
Excuse me. Yeah. There. Really got a frog, sorry. Uh, why doesn't Dan cover it for me while I'm gagging over here? Sorry.
Yes, the point of entry is the required compliance location via federal EPA for the monitoring via the PFAS rule. So when we are assessing compliance, we are at the point of entry. However, this monitoring via the order is at the source. That provides us with critical information on blending ratios. Also, should a well go down, which well is the contributor of PFAS and what other actions need to be taken. So it's a bit of an analysis. However, compliance is at point of entry. And as we move forward, we're allowing those point of entry prior monitoring to work and comply with our assessment moving forward.
I'll just add on, now that the frog's gone out of my throat, sorry about that, this is the process we use for all our MCLs in California. Everything starts with a source monitoring. And then if they do treatment or have an agreed upon blending plan, that's detailed in the permit we issue for them on how they're to manage and operate that for the very reason that Dan mentioned. So it's a little bit more protective than the EPA approach. EPA says just monitor at your entry point. And as Dan mentioned, if you have two wells, one high, one low, and they're working fine together, if you lose the well that is your blender, in the EPA world, you'd never know that. You would just continue on, and now there's a really high number, and you're going to get stuck with an MCL hit at a later point. And so we want to know that ahead of time in the California approach. So any MCL we contemplate, we've already indicated, at least at this point, and I think that's probably the point of the comment, that we are going to follow the methodology we use for all our MCLs in California with PFAS regarding source. It would be a real outlier and maybe even confusing for water systems, I think, if we separated it out. If we talked about that, I think we would get comments the other way, like, why are you making PFAS so different in approach and, causing some confusion there. So that's the genesis of it. So appreciate the comment, and we'll definitely take it to heart that we need to communicate how this works with water systems so that it doesn't seem like it's something different or new.
Much appreciation. Board Member Firestone.
So just a clarification on that. So if you have, if a water system has a source that is over the notification level, but they're blending to, and what's going in the system is below the notification level, how does that play out?
Yeah. So in essence, when you're working through this, the point is to try to make sure that we, in contemplating the permits we're going to issue for a water system, know what the possibilities are associated with all their sources. So having that source, if it's the simplistic of one source or two sources, one high above an MCL, one low, but the blend does end up below an MCL or an NLRL component, then we can contemplate that number in their permit, but with provisions such that, upon losing the well, what are they going to do? It gets a little more interesting when you add in more wells and the ability for them to switch sources around and modify in order to maintain below an MCL. So yeah, what happens is they would go out of compliance, at the entry point because that source is there. But at least that would be understood beforehand, where in an EPA situation, they just take the entry point numbers and they don't know what's contributing to those from each source well. And so you're kind of surprised rather than expecting the result.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense to do the monitoring that way. I guess I'm curious though about the notification. So are consumers getting notifications if the water going into the system is meeting notification levels, or do they, does that not trigger the notification requirements?
So the order requires monitoring at the source. However, if there's believed de facto treatment or blending, a water system is able to pair a sample at the point of entry with our source monitoring. If the point of entry does show compliance, then no notification is required.
Okay, thanks.
So I'll just comment that we interpreted broadly into 116378 because it talked about having a source or removing it. but it didn't contemplate treatment or blending. But we believe the intent of that legislation was that what are people getting in their source? And so that's really the measure by which we operate. And so we do consider if they are blending it or they are treating it, then of course that's equivalent to removing a source and preventing public exposure.
One more clarification. I think you said this in the presentation, but just to the points made about, factoring in the federal contemplations around this. I think you mentioned for these particular contaminants, are they included in the ones that they're considering? I think you said there was
Yeah.
stuff said that they're not. So can you just clarify that again?
So in their indication that they're retaining PFOA and PFOS, they're contemplating a reevaluation of PFHXS, and a PFHXA is not even on their list. So it's separate and would not be part of their contemplation.
Thanks.
And Chair Esco was right. My read of their recontemplation is merely around economics, not that the science associated with the health impacts was defective, but that the economic impact was understated.
Thank you, board member. Yeah, and important to note, on the federal side, they do a cost benefit analysis as their approach, and we just have the term economic feasibility, which we explore. And as I think all the water agencies well know at this point, so. All right. Looking to my colleagues, if there's anything further. This has been a dense and meaty morning. Again, for everyone tuning in, paying attention, there's a lot of work obviously going on along in the PFAS side. There's a lot of work going on other components of drinking water, as we've said. There's a lot out there, and folks shouldn't be scared from their tap because of this discussion. They should actually be even more confident that the state agencies and the best minds we have are contemplating and figuring out how we wend our way through this, knowing that there's just thousands of PFAS compounds out there, and we could be here for a long time if we take each one unto itself. So looking forward to that continued discussion around treatment as a class, treatment technique perhaps, because I think, to Board Member McGuire's point about helping water agencies understand, well, where are we going here? What should they be planning for? I think that gets us to something that's a little more of a less, constituent by constituent approach that we're currently on, but it's still a lot of work ahead. So just really appreciate it. Appreciate the leadership and expertise and the discussion here. Thank you, everyone. All right, that wraps up item number 6 and is bringing us to just the final 2 items of this 2-day board meeting. Board member reports and then our executive director's report. Is there any board member who'd like to kick us off in reports? Board member Morgan.
I just have one item. So last week, I was able to go to on August 29th, able to go to the Nile Garden Elementary School ribbon cutting. And because it was the last week of summer, I was spending some time with my son. So I took him along with me and I let him know where we were going. And his first comment was, before I can even finish explaining the event, was, "Mom, schools, you have to have drinking water at school. They have to have they have to be able to drink water." So I was like, "Well, yes, son, that's why we are going, because this is the ribbon cutting. They now have a connection with the city so they can have water." And so we went, and it was really cool just to watch him, just to take in the project and to see and to understand just the visual piece, because we do talk about obviously at home. So it was a $9 million grant from our SAFER program. This project was at least 10 years in the making. It was really cool to see this. I had worked on this project as when I was staff. So it really was nice to see just that connection to the city of Manteca. And this is the 225th school that has received funding for emergency supplies or long-term solutions. And so there just really is a need out there for schools and for children. And this year they had a well that was contaminated with arsenic and 123 TCP. They're still working on the well piece, but that connection to the city is just really important and really needed and necessary for this school. And so it's just really just a great moment, a nice way for part of our final week of summer to spend, a day with my son, just being there, and for him just to see the completion of a project at an elementary school. And dropping him off this morning at school, first thing he did, he's going to a new school. First thing he did says, "Okay, there's the water fountain. These are very important." And he was pointing them all out to me. And so it's just really awesome. So it was a great event to attend.
Absolutely fantastic. Really appreciate your attendance there, board member, and that it was a great opportunity to show what you do in your daily work for your son, and that's really incredible. Vice Chair.
Training the next generation. It's great. Okay, so on the 17th of July, I attended SEB's Summer Issues Forum and was on a panel with Karen Mogus, Sean Bothwell from Coast Keepers. I'm not recalling the name of the person from BACWA, the Bay Area Clean Water Agency, and Susan Paulson. And the topic of the discussion was streamlined permitting and water quality. In other words, the importance of doing both. And so I chose to focus on the water supply strategy, talked about desal, recycled water, a lot of the efforts that we're doing to move projects through with the strike team, and the work on desal with the updated report, and coordinating with our sister agencies on permitting. And then also focused on groundwater recharge and some of the things that we've been doing under the new statute, and kind of walk them through the distinction between applying for a permit versus picking up flows during high flow events, and some of the conditions, including water quality. And then on the 22nd of July, I attended Western Growers Board of Directors meeting and provided for a general update, and focusing mostly on Bay Delta and Sigma. And then same thing, same sort of topic that I covered on the 24th at the Wine Institute.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vice Chair. Just quickly for myself, on the 17th, I was also at SEB, gave opening remarks in the morning. It was good to be able to hear from folks, just give an overview of all the many things that are before the board right now. It was a good opportunity to connect. On the 18th, I attended the DRIP Collaborative. That is born out of SB 552, I think it is, directing a lot of drought work. The Department of Water Resources and ourselves have been co-hosting discussions with counties, NGOs, others involved in drought, and it was a good, yet another good meeting. A lot that folks are wanting to address, and just I know a lot of needing to prioritize, certainly in that space. So it was also a good opportunity to continue to emphasize the work we're doing around domestic wells and supporting them through drought. So glad to have attended. On the 31st was a tribal GIS summit that the State Water Board and other state agency partners came together and supported. I want to give a shout out to Dr. Donna Begay. She's fantastic, and really is the one that shepherded and brought us all together. Former Water Board's staffer as well, so that was great. And that's all I have.
Okay, great. So there's a theme here. So on the 17th of July, I also was at SEB at the Summer Issues Seminar on a panel with Karen Mogus, also Sean Bothwell, and Tess Dunham. And our topic was on the Sackett decision and the implications there. So my focus was really on what it meant for the Water Board and how we're handling the Supreme Court decision and waters of the state and waters of the United States, how we're moving forward in that avenue. There was also some discussion on the proposed legislation in that area. I really left that to the other folks on the panel to cover that topic. And then on the 24th, I was at the kickoff, groundbreaking, if you will, for the community of Robbins, which has recently been acquired by Golden State Water Company in what's essentially a management consolidation of a small water system that's been dealing with arsenic compliance issues for the past decade. The Water Board's been really involved with providing technical assistance, and also providing bottled water since at least 2020. So for the past 5 years to the community. So it was really heartening to see a project moving forward. They're starting construction with the arsenic treatment facility, but more importantly, I think, is getting that TMF in place and having the leadership of a water agency that's got the capability to provide that sustainable operations and management of the water system going forward. So I think it was a good celebration, and I think the construction should be lasting another year or so. So hopefully they'll be receiving safe drinking water and off-bottled water in the near future. That's all I have.
Great. Thank you, board member.
Yeah, I visited PG&E's facility. I think other board members had done this in the past, and related to the item that we heard yesterday around reporting, and got a tour of their facilities. That was really helpful to think about, the complexity of water rights data in terms of not just what we're measuring, but then how we do the accounting within water rights, and thinking about our new data system and how that continues to evolve. Was also able to listen in. I know board member Morgan was leading the wastewater needs assessment advisory meeting. We also, I was also able to participate in a tour of the Eden Fire recovery with Region 4. So Region 4 had sort of spaced out, but gotten a number of board members over time to be able to see the recovery area. The County Public Works put on a really helpful tour. It's amazing, the sites that accepted cleanup assistance are all finished with that phase. Their first house was going up. They have a permit, a one-stop shop permit center, and really they bring together every part of the county so that somebody comes in and can talk with everyone. They can come over to the table together and talk to a customer, so that things can get resolved within a day, rather than what was, I think, 9 months or something. So, I mean, it's just, there's a lot of innovation going on around streamlining there. And was really also just seeing the different water systems, that some of which are, have lost over 70% of their customers, all their water supply infrastructure, really. But luckily, I've been able to tie in. And I know there were just huge compliments to our Division of Drinking Water and emergency staff in helping. And I think also importantly, a lot of recognition that the regional board's permits, so there were, executive orders waiving different things, but importantly, the county for most things didn't have to utilize those because they were able to utilize their existing permits. And I think when we think about the idea of streamlining, the quickest thing is to not need a new permit and be able to just use the permit that you have where you know what the requirements are and you just implement them. And that's, I think, an indication that that our water quality protection programs were designed well. They were able to be implemented, and it was helpful and ensured protection and quick response. So anyway, that was really fascinating. I know Chair Esquivel toured a lot earlier, but this was an interesting time to see now that most of it's been cleaned up and houses or at least one house is starting to go back up. And then yesterday was no, not yesterday, the day before yesterday, was able to help celebrate groundbreaking on phase 2 for the Yucca Valley wastewater septic to sewer project. So this project is, I mean, decades in the making. This was a project where the regional board had issued prohibition on septics, and as because of nitrate impacts to the groundwater basin, the drinking water supply, and uh, the entire community, city was on septic. They've done phase 1 through Clean Water SRF low interest loan. And this was phase 2 and happened to be at a time when they were able to take advantage of the budget surplus general funds. And so we're able to get over $100 million grant for this project, which meant that they didn't have to otherwise they weren't going to be able to move forward with the project, frankly, but they had estimated it would be about $30,000 per parcel in terms of assessments that would be needed, which this is a low-income community, mostly fixed income, just was not an option. So, thank goodness it was at a good time, but also underscoring the need to continue to work for getting clean water funding as well as drinking water funding for these types of projects, and also just how much it takes a village to and many agencies to help these projects get done. So that's it.
Fantastic. Many thanks, board member. That moves us off of board member reports and on to the executive director's report. Mr. Oppenheimer, anything?
Yeah, thanks. So the Office of Public Engagement, Equity, and Tribal Affairs reports quarterly in this report, and their report is included in this month's report. So I just wanted to mention that. It's fairly thorough, touches on a number of topics: tribal engagement, the SAFER program, their work in the Sigma program. So it's fairly cross-cutting, and just wanted to point out that that report's in this month's update. And that's all I have, unless there's questions.
Thank you for flagging that. Really appreciate it. Looking to colleagues in case there's anything from the executive director's report. Seeing none. Thank you very much. All right, that brings us nearly to the end of our 2-day meeting. We will actually go into closed session. We have closed session on both the Delta Conveyance Project and also sites. Looking to board colleagues, do we want to get lunch and then do an early lunch? Well, and what's that? You want to go close now? Okay. Well, we can go ahead and go to close now then. Let's meet up in, say, 10 minutes up in, or do we say 15? We'll give ourselves 15.
It's probably good to get the Zoom spun up.
Yeah, let's go ahead and say we'll meet at 11:45 and we're up in 2540. And
Correct.
so we'll go from there. All right. And we will we'll officially close out at that point. Our next meeting will be on August 19th. And so for the rest of you all, thank you. Be safe, be well. Appreciate the 2-day board meeting. We'll see you all back here on the 19th. Many thanks.